Hi, my name is Valeria Landeros Medina, and I will be reflecting on my fourth grade lesson titled Guess in Five's research lesson, which has to do with gathering facts using Pebble Go. The purpose of the lesson is to develop research skills, strengthen information literacy, and also prepare students for creating an Adobe anime character in a future lesson. Students will also have also learned how to locate information and identify important facts from a reliable source. In this case, that is Pebble Go. Now before I start, I do want to talk about the changes that I made after my pre-conference with my supervisor. The very first one was that it was originally designed as a 2-day lesson. So I did have to shorten that. Day one was mostly focused on research, and day two was focused on creating an Adobe Animate character, and that is how I formatted it. So this lesson is more heavily based on that research being its own separate lesson, while giving and leading into the next lesson, which is the Adobe Animate character, which is also one of my extensions. So for this lesson, we did only have about 35 minutes, um, but it did fit into one observation period. I also did add some citations and edited my references to make sure that they were in APA style. Um, but the part that I focused more on was expanding my extensions. Originally, I did only make activities for students who finished early. However, after having the meeting with my field supervisor, I did add more meaningful extensions that every student could use. And instead of being focused on task oriented, it was more focused on continuing that inquiry, being curious, and researching. That does take me very smoothly into my next section, which is the extensions for further study. Again, I did originally only have very limited extensions, so I did add to it. The most important one for my extensions is that Adobe Animate project. So in my mentorship, they are doing research with that lesson, and then another lesson is going to proceed where they create their Adobe Animate character, but students are going to use their research notes that they learned that they made today in this lesson for that. They're going to use the facts from their topic, and then with those topic they are going to choose the most important facts, and their classmates would guess um, what their topic is based on those clues. And in the lesson, you can hear me mentioning that for the future lesson, but um we don't complete that part of the activity in this lesson. The other things that I did add was additional research. I really wanted students to locate a minimum of 5 facts, but students could also find more than 5. And in the beginning of the lesson, you can see me point to where there's a read more. Sorry, a read more. Um, and students can investigate there to find more topics about it and more in depth. Uh, Again, this does encourage them to be curious and be independent. Something else that they could do would be to compare related topics. For example, they could research another animal and have lions versus tigers, and they would have to identify the similarities and the differences. Um, and this would promote higher level thinking. Students could also create more challenging clues. Um, And then just move beyond the obvious facts. Again, in the beginning of the lesson, you can see where I point to all of the tabs that are in PebbleGo. Uh, and I tell them where the ones that are located on the paper. However, I also mention where they could find more information than just the obvious facts so that they could include something unique or surprising or something that's just not very commonly known. And this would encourage critical thinking from the that student along with every other student. They could also continue using PebbleGo. In the Read More tab, there is more related articles or similar animals related to that topic, but this would build on their research skills and encourage them to inquire independently. Something that I also really would like for the students to do would be to use print resources. We In that library that I'm currently at, the whole back wall of the library is nonfiction. So locating a nonfiction book in the library and then comparing that information from Pebble Go to a book that they find. For example, if they were researching lions and they used PebbleGo to find facts about lions, then they would go to the nonfiction section and locate a book about lions there and then compare that information. What information is the same? What information is different? Um, and then just kind of start thinking about why that is. Why would this source say one thing? Why would this source say another? How can we identify reliable sources? Which information is more useful? Things like that. So that would encourage a lot of critical thinking. Um, and something I kind of already mentioned before was continue using PebbleGo. They could really explore related articles and then again just build on those research skills. Um, Additional databases that they could use would be like Britannica Kids. They provide much information about a lot of topics that is peer reviewed. National Geographic Kids includes a lot of information for animals that they could again compare and contrast between the information found in Pebble Go versus the information found in National Geographic Kids. Um, and one website that our district has also encouraged us to use is the Internet Public Library Kids Space. And this would just give the kids, some exposure to different sources and start thinking about different perspectives. So now we're moving into what went particularly well. I do think that a lot of things went particularly well in this lesson. One of the specific strengths that I saw was engagement. Students were very excited about the Guess in Fives activity and they were very eager to participate. I do think that the hook was the one that captured their attention. I asked a couple of questions for them to guess what topic I was talking about. Um, and I had them raise their hands and talk about sorry, I had them raise their hands and then just kind of wait until everybody in the class had figured it out. And then at the very end, I did call on one person. They were able to guess the topic, which was a polar bear. And then I did do a follow-up question asking them what clue gave it away. Then we kind of started talking about why was that clue more important than the other ones. So my very first clue was it's very cold, or I like cold weather, something like that. And that clue was very generic, very broad. So not a lot of kids were able to guess it, or even if they were thinking about it, it probably wasn't the correct answer, which was a polar bear. So we did talk about um being specific and intentional with their clues and their information. Um, But I did think that this really made students excited to become researchers when I told them that they were going to be creating their own Guess and Fives game to share with their classmates. They were excited. They wanted to search up information. Um, I do think that the modeling also went really well. Having them respond or repeat back after me where they were able to find the information. We walked through the graphic organizer together. So they were able to separate like interesting or key facts from um, interesting ones. And that part really just kind of helped them determine which information is the most important and which one would give the most clues to their peers about their specific topic. Um, Something that I think also went really well was the questioning. There might be some parts in the video where you might not be able to hear what I'm asking them, but I do walk around and then I start asking them deeper level questions. I want them to start thinking more critically, and I ask them a lot about why those reliable sources matter. Why is it important to record information accurately? Which ones of your facts would make the most, or sorry, the best clue in a guessing game? What's making Pebble Go a more reliable source for information? Maybe even which fact or about your topic surprised you the most? Um, and I did ask them how do researchers or how do they think researchers decide which facts are important. Um, and then that played into them being their own researcher and deciding which facts were important versus the ones that were just kind of interesting. Lastly, I do think that the closure activity also went really well. Um, I had picked a student from early on, probably throughout the middle of the activity. She had chosen an animal and she had created many facts. So I asked her if she could volunteer at the very end. And then we kind of walked through which two facts um, to give out or which two were the most important so that their friends or their classmates could start thinking about what animal she had, and this built her confidence. She wanted to share at the very end. She called me over, I believe it was about 2 or 3 times, to just make sure that this fact was more important than the one before. And so I would put a little star next to that. um so at the very end, whenever we did close out, I had her share the two most important facts that she had. Um, and same thing as in the beginning, I didn't even have to explain the rules again. The kids knew to raise their hand whenever they had a guess, but to hold off their guesses until she had finished reading her last question. Um, And then we had some classmates guess. However, since we are going to continue and expand on this activity for next week, I didn't want them to know the full extent. So, just based off of those two little facts, um, I had it open up to four guesses. And then we started thinking about what would be some more clues, important information that would have their guesses be more clear, something more concrete. We reviewed the importance of specific information versus broad, vague information, um, so that they would be ready for their research any other time and for them to continue their activity the following week. Um, so I do think it did reinforce the learning very well. some changes that I would make before teaching the lesson again would be to create maybe more examples. Um, so maybe demonstrating multiple examples. Something else that I thought of later would be to have them choose their form of note taking. Would they rather have a bubble map or a chart or something like that, or would they rather create their own? Um, so that we're also teaching them how to take notes, and then just to support their student confidence. Something else that I would also maybe would like to do is partner them up to increase collaboration, um, and then having them share their facts with their classmates first before giving feedback or sharing out to the whole class, just letting them talk to each other first and then giving whole class feedback. Something that I also wanted to do was to have maybe a range of pre-selected topics. For example, for this one, we had chosen my mentor and I had chosen animals. And I do think that it helped a lot in reducing that time for kids to choose their their topic, um, and maximize their research time. Now, the biggest difference that I saw between creating a lesson for the library and the classroom lesson was that there was a much, much greater emphasis on technology. There was more technology integration, more of the students using like iPads and databases, and then in the future using the Adobe Animate. I did also notice there was a stronger focus on information literacy. So, teaching the students how to find the information and teaching them how to identify important facts and reliable resources versus um, just giving them that simple content task. This one felt more oriented towards that information literacy. Something that I really, really also noticed that was similar, but also like a bit different was that it was more inquiry based. Students explore topics that they were interested in versus me choosing the topics for them. I do think that this encouraged curiosity and discovery, and that it did promote them to be independent learners. Um, Additionally, I think that digital citizenship and responsible research was a strong focus point. We discussed responsible use of digital resources and reliable databases such as PebbleGo that did emphasize the ethical use of information. And there was a shift in my thinking. Classroom lessons are often more focused on the content standards versus in the library, they're more focused on lifelong learning skills. There's more of an emphasis on inquiry, on collaboration, and on information literacy. And really quickly, just to wrap it up, some other lesson ideas that I thought about was this same structure, but biography. So they would research a famous person and then create the clues for their classmates, potentially being named something like guess the biography. Another thing they could do would be like an animal comparison project. So they would research two animals and then create a presentation comparing the two using those facts found in databases. Something else would be like a citizenship lesson, that would talk about online safety, password protection, digital footprints, but the students would each research one of those topics and then create clues for their classmates to guess which concepts they were talking about. Another one would be like natural disasters, for example, hurricanes, tornadoes, volcanoes, or habitats around the world like deserts, rainforests, or the ocean. Similar to the biography one, could be like inventors and inventions. They would research famous inventors and explain how inventions changed the world. And I do think that this ties into their social studies. Um, Also, maybe researching a country around the world so that we start to incorporate geography and culture, and they could share these facts with their classmates in a similar way. Um, so to conclude, my reflection, this lesson did demonstrate how research, technology, creativity, and student choice can work together. Students practice their information literacy and their inquiry skills, and the lesson helps students become more effective users of information. This experience helped me think more like a school librarian and less like a classroom teacher, but overall the lesson reinforced the importance of preparing students to locate, evaluate, and share information in meaningful ways. Thank you.